Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander.
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
It actually doesn't take a great amount of common sense and research to realize how easy it is to spin, distort, manipulate, or completely fabricate an entire narrative. Take that concept a little further, and you can begin to see how this can affect the writing of history books, the making of maps, the funding and direction of research, the content of the 6 mass media conglomerates, and social media algorithms that covertly influence what you get on your feed, which then affects how you perceive others and the world. In other words, it's devastatingly simple. Once you've arrived at this realization, then you begin to understand that what you previously thought of as reality is merely the roped off section of a much larger configuration, and that what's beyond those ropes is where the real stuff happens. This is where independent researchers such as today's guest, Crrow777, come in. He's taken matters into his own hands, starting with his extensive study of the very skies above us. He's taken hundreds of hours of footage of the sky, and what he witnessed led him down the path of beginning to question the very nature of everything around us and what we've been told about it. I start off the conversation by asking Crow what it was that got him looking at the skies in the first place.
For my whole life, I wanted a telescope, and it wasn't till after I got out of the Marine Corps. I think I had about $1,000 in my pocket from back pay from the Marine Corps, but I didn't have any debt. And I finally, on accident, bumped into a deal on a telescope, and it was a fully robotic 8-inch Meade back when they were made in the United States with all the extras. So I went in debt big and finally got myself a telescope. And so over the years, I used it. Back in the film days, I did astrophotography, and I began to realize something's not right here. It just took me a long time to realize that it's not me. You know, you do things and why can't I come close to what I'm being shown? And slowly over time, you realize I'm not the one who's off here. What's being written in all these books is what is off.
Yeah. So what were some of the anomalies that you were seeing that kind of put those flags up?
You know, back in the early 90s, I was all about what NASA wanted to show me, and particularly the Hubble. That's what captured my mind. It's like, my God, look at all these things. And so I got film, and I finally got my scope, and I could get things that were the right shape, kind of, but they never came close to what the Hubble was producing. So eventually I realized this is all put together. It's all created imagery based on the reality of a shape or a form of the thing, to the point where, I don't know, 6-7 months ago, I was looking to try to get a permanently stationary scope, and I was looking at the modern astrophotography tools. One of the palettes they put on the CCD camera is called the Hubble palette. So you can get those fake golds and interesting turquoise blues that don't exist.
Interesting. That makes such good desktop patterns for people's computers.
That capture the imagination so deftly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so you did a hell of a lot of sort of shooting video of the sky, right? And in particular, the moon.
Well, that's, even to this day, as I'm specking out things in the modern time, all these experts in telescope world are all, why do you want to shoot video? And I can't, I'm saying I want to shoot high-end video. I'll do the stills, but I want high-end video. They still don't see the value because that doesn't get you the Hubble image. That's still driving the whole telescope community. So to get the high-end video, well, that's a whole other story. But in 2012, I hadn't had my scope out for some time, and we busted it out, and we had a night where we saw these amazing things, and I just thought, wow, I got to be able to record this, but I'll never see anything like this again for the rest of my life. We saw these black triangles and everything, and we tracked the moon for like hours, and they just kept flying in formation. So next day I got what I needed, and I started videoing. I didn't even know that nobody was videoing. I guess still nobody's videoing. In the world, in the modern age of video, in astrophotography land, there's still no video, which is bizarre to say the least, because everything's moving. But so that's how it started. And I don't know, it was a week or two. It was not a long time before I caught my first interesting thing. I don't recall what it was, one little black dots probably. And then in September, purely on accident, I shot the 2012 lunar wave. And a month after, I held on to that footage for a year. I posted it, I think it was October of 2013. A month later, my life changed, and there was a flat Earth community that just exploded behind the posting of that clip.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I've heard, I think I heard it first, you first mentioned the lunar wave back on the Higher Side chats a few years back. And it sounded very, very compelling, but it wasn't until probably about a month ago that Hunter and I first watched Shooting the Moon, and we got to see it. And holy shit, it's amazing. What can you describe it for people who maybe haven't seen it before?
If you took an old-fashioned VCR camera with a tape in it and you filmed an old-fashioned tube TV, you get this rolling wave look. That's the closest I could come. A true lunar wave is always in pairs. And the other thing is I don't remember if I coined it, but someone recently told me that I did coin the word lunar wave. I don't know for sure that's true. Could be. I would have called it something different. If I could rename it, I would call it a firmament wave, because back then I was convinced it was tied to the equinoxes somehow, and I was convinced it was tied to the moon somehow. Neither one of those things is 100% true. Well, one of them is just flat wrong. It's been filmed in front of Jupiter, Saturn. So I'm reasonably sure anywhere in the ecliptic where there's a bright object in the background, you could probably film what we call a lunar wave.
Well, I would like to get into a description of what the firmament is too, but why would you change it to firmament wave?
Because a wave like that has to go through something. And, I know for years and years, I've said what I said was a hard, fast boundary. I always try to use middle of the road language. So, what happens is you say astronomy and all the astrologers flip you off and leave the room. You say astrology and the reverse happens. Exactly. Which is how I coined the word sky clock, trying to find a way that we could all have a common conversation without all this baggage. So I called a hard, fast boundary when I was as sure as I can be that nothing's coming or going from this place. We're living in a hermetically sealed environment, and everything that's here is here, mostly. And so as the flat Earth busted off, of course, you're aware of what's been said. Oh, there's domes. There's all these ways they like to describe it. But the problem with that is if you use that kind of language in a way, you inherit the ideas of that community, which are not always helpful, by the way. Things get way out in left field pretty quick. So to me, I think the old religious texts were telling us the truth. And on top of that, I think it was 2016, I announced, and this is kind of interesting. There was a man, I guess I won't use his name. He got so much trouble and he was trying to get married and he almost lost his job as an engineer, but he released a video on the same day as I did, unbeknownst to me. On the day that I released it, I said, I'm reasonably sure that space would be better described as liquid. He did the same thing, but with high-end engineering know-how, science, using all the language that you might find in a textbook. That happened in 2016. And the reason I mention it is because in the old spiritual text is the idea of a firmament separating the waters from the waters. But what's more is if you go back to all the versions and look for that word, you can see what's happened. If you go back to the original word, it literally means a firm, something firm, like it sounds.
Sure.
But
interesting. Yeah.
There's all that.
I find that all of so fascinating because being the kind of show that this is and the kind of person that we have been for most of our lives, we've always been questioners and always have sensed that there are things that are under the surface and probably not too far under the surface that we just aren't told about or we're flat out lied to about. And this is a biggie. This is a big one. And all of it seems very, very plausible, but a lot of this information is very new to me. So I'm just digging. I find it really compelling to think about this stuff. Do you think that something like the lunar wave or the firmament wave implies deception in and of itself? Do you think that the moon is, what do you think the moon is? Let's just cut right to the chase.
A mystery wrapped in enigma. It'll never look the same 2 nights in a row. There are things like the so-called Metonic cycle, which is 19 years, hint, 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 for those who like to count the ways. There's an 11-year cycle on the moon, but what those things actually mean beyond the mathematics of it is critically important. And unfortunately, everyone I know is wearing diapers about the same size as mine. We're struggling to get one of the little clasps off our diapers right now. That's where I am. It's the be all and the end all. The sky clock is the be all and the end all. It always has been. I may be doing an episode with Jason in the coming year where I describe how the fall happens or how we just continually fell to where we are now. Part of it's zodiacal, right? You know, if you go back to the supposed Hebrew age, we're in the sign of Aries, which is the crown of the head. Well, the age of Pisces, which follows, is the feet. That's the biggest fall you can take,
Sure.
from the crown of the head down to the feet.
Absolutely.
But the truth of it is that our calendars were jacked up, and it was done for a reason. And while we can't accept any date BC, or for that matter, any date early AD, because they've all been obscured and shuffled and had a false history laid over the top of them, the names of those who did the changing, we can get at those. We can get at Pope Gregory. We can get at other people like supposed Julius Caesar, if he was ever a living man. But what's more intriguing is Augustus Caesar. You can lay the rise and the divinity, the so-called, you know, back then, I guess they're claiming, well, I'm king of the world now, so I'm a god. Well, what they were doing is they were using the sky clock. You couldn't be a son of God in those days unless there was a sky clock event to prove it. And so what they did is they jacked up calendars, and you have no idea to the lengths they went to do things like this. But interestingly enough, Augustus Caesar overlaid the birth of Jesus Christ, but the Vatican moved his story back 15 years. And I kid you not, but what has been kind of discovered here is the sky clock is the be all and end all for this place. All the possibilities, all the passage of time, all the recording of what has happened, and the possibilities of what will happen, that's all the sky clock. And as we moved away from it, we began to lose our connection to the creation. And the further away from it we got, where we are now, very few of us could probably, if everything stopped today, how many people could go out and grow things and know about the sky clock, know when and how to do it? That's where the synthetic things come in. And once you go synthetic, the opening prefix there, sin, tells you really where you are. You have foregone your grant at the zygote, where you receive the divine spark and free will and a place in the natural world where there is no lie. All that is chucked out the window, which is where we are currently. And everybody's, anyone could look around right now, go look at what goods and services are about to cost. It's almost like a drug dealer, right? They gave us the first few years for free, but now you want to keep that goods and services addiction, you're going to pay a hell-bent price, more than I'm willing to pay. But this all rests on the sky clock, which is the apex critical, irreplaceable, undeniable thing in this world. And back in the time of the so-called Roman Empire, however it existed, it was known. And not only that, it was known that every, I think they're stating 666 years now. I've heard differing versions, 500 years. There's going to be one of these special people, a Buddha, a Jesus, these special teachers in the world. But each one of them, according to the what was written back then, is tied to an event in the sky clock. Oh, there's an eclipse. Oh, there's a comet. Oh, there's whatever. But those eclipse cycles, so critically important. And we are struggling to try to get back to knowing anything about them.
So how would you, if you could simply define the sky clock, how would you break it down?
If you believe there's a creator of this world, when you look up into the sky clock, you could view that as his direction of how this world will be, how time will pass, how eras will end, how everything that happens here is recorded in the so-called stars. If you don't believe in a creator, then I think you can translate in your mind pretty easily what I just said. It's the arbiter of all existence, but not just the arbiter. It doesn't per se force an outcome, but it heavily provides outcomes that could be. And for those who have studied anything, there's the idea of an Akashic record. Maybe some people be familiar.
Yeah,
that's the sky clock.
Gotcha.
To the point where if you go back to old enough books, you can see that they'll tell you, if you go count the roofs on a pagoda in Asia that are old, and then the location of it, it'll tell you what age it was built in. Very few people know these things. Back then, the sky clock was everything. And now we don't know a thing about it. Not only do we not know a thing about it, my big problem is I don't want to learn a system because I'm convinced it's been shuffled, that the boundaries are wrong and how we think about it is wrong. And that's even proven out in tropical astrology, which basically we owe most of our definitions to tropical astrology. What do these things mean? We can go back to myth and see, well, what is Mars doing? What is Mars supposed to mean? But my point is, if you go outside and look up at the sky over your head, it is not what tropical astrology is concerned with. They've calculated back to a time when they feel it was correct. But from my point of view, the sky clock is what the sky clock is. In other words, the moment I was born, I'm told I'm a Sagittarius, but if I calculate it to the sky that was actually over me, I am probably Ophiuchian, if there's a 13 sign, or a Scorpio. And yet I am right on the cusp of Sagittarius. Almost every woman I've known or dated in my life, to include my mother and my current wife, have been so-called Virgos. Both of them, with the sky that was over their head, are actually Leos. So what do we do with that? My solution is, hey, sidereal people who look at the sky that exists, get together with tropical people and work together and try to further back the knowledge that we've lost. And instead, what tends to happen, it's the same what happens with an astrologer and astronomer. They can't meet in the middle. They can't see eye to eye.
Well, all this, it really leads to the idea that everything is interconnected. There's no boundaries between this and that. It's all bound together. And something like you're talking about the sky clock, it just seems to be a perfectly tangible example of that. Like everything is interconnected and we all affect each other. And it seems like the syntheticness that you're talking about is not only metaphorical, but a literal way of us trying to disengage from nature, from the natural workings of things. Would you look at it that way?
Yeah, as soon as you leave nature, you've left truth behind. All the truth that exists in the world is found in nature. Nature tells no lies. That's what you give up. You want to go synthetic, you want to go technical and all these things, and you're now living in a world of lies. And that's the difference between now and back when everybody knew what the sky clock was for. It's not so easy to lie to people that are connected to the creation where there is no lie. It's not so easy to manipulate them. And that's why we get these false histories. They're going to tell you that every period of existence, we've been killing each other and having wars. That's what they're going to lead you to believe. But it's troubling. You know, look what's going on in the world right now. Are we about to see a massive genocide? Is that what's going on? 5 years from now, are we going to be looking at the empty stadiums? Well, there are pictures in this world of 1800s major cities completely empty. And many of the pictures are taken from a high vantage point. Does this happen every time we do an age change? But what's more vexing than all of it, when is the age change? And every time I say this, I'm going to get 1,000 emails from brilliant minds that can answer that question. But I'm sorry, if you're going to demonstrate it, you got to be able to prove it. It is a truth of nature. And when we started our new calendar without a year zero, AD 1, was that artificially placed, or should it truly have been matched to Augustus Caesar 15 years earlier? And for that matter, why do the other calendars that go back another 5,000 plus years have a year zero? All this is encapsulated in the Old and New Testament. But my point is, there's nothing you can trust until you prove it back out. And so, you know, when the age is great, now demonstrate it. I think it's pretty clear from what's going on in the world, everything is changing now, but are we in the 200 or 300 year crossover between ages, or is that in our rear view? Is it more like the Matrix, where Morpheus says to Neo, well, we think it's this year, but it could be a couple hundred years off there. As a matter of fact, we're pretty sure we are. That's a better analogy for where we find ourselves, because we do not know where we are, how we got here, how long we've been here, or what time it is. We don't know any of those things.
So do you think that there is, looking at all of this, like a big sort of galactical working, like a almost, I don't want to say a machine, but when you talk about the sky clock, it seems like you could almost predict the future with it, which would lend itself to the idea of predestiny. Do you think that there is predestiny, or do you think that with our free will, we can steer the future into whatever direction we want?
You can make the wrong decision anytime you want because you were granted free will with your divine spark at the zygote. There is a bit of predestiny in it, but not to the level that implies. And by the way, there are still existing accounts of when people knew the sky clock down to the second, and those masters claim that you don't have accidents anymore. The idea of an accident is no longer possible. So this begins to tell you that if you're a religious person, you might think I'm starting to see eye to eye with God here. I'm not just a person muddling through the world anymore. I'm tied into this higher reality. And so I don't fall off a cliff. I don't have a car accident because I can see. I don't know how to describe it any better, but there are plenty of accounts, and we're far from there. We don't even know what zodiacal sign we're in right now. And for that matter, if people want to grumble and tell me I'm wrong, check this out. So everyone's familiar with a map where, and by the way, every map you've ever seen is wrong. You have no idea what the shape of the continent you're standing on looks like. But the equator goes down the center, and above that is a tropic, and below is a tropic. We call them the tropics of Cancer above and Capricorn below.
Mm-hmm.
Why are those names put there? Well, I'll tell you why they're put there. Because at the highest extent of the sun was in the tropic of was in the sign of Capricorn. So it marks the northernmost latitude of the sun in Capricorn, which is what was behind the sun. The opposite, down at wintertime, the 21st now for us, or 22nd, basically Christmas time, at the low point of the sun, was in Capricorn. It's been thousands of years since that was true. So where the hell is the Tropic of Gemini? Where is the Tropic of Sagittarius? And this underscores at such an undeniable level where we are if you take the time to think about it. We are out of time. We are out of place. Let me ask you this. How can you possibly know where you can go if you don't know where you are?
Exactly. Yeah, makes total sense.
So it sounds like we are living in an experiment.
Well, I mean, sure, when someone gets control of things enough, which we're currently experiencing, I guess you could call that an experiment, but I don't think it's an experiment because an experiment looks for an outcome. What we're experiencing is trying to force an outcome. There's a dark side, and it's easy to see if you go back to the truth. Can you name a community in our world that is completely unaffected by what's just happened?
Yes. Like tribes in the Amazon, for example.
I can tell you a couple that are here in the United States.
Oh, sure, sure. Like the Amish.
There you go.
Yeah.
So how is it that the Amish have zero occurrence of autism and have been completely unaffected by this? Well, they know the truth of nature and
Yes.
they held fast to it. And that's where the truth is. In the natural world, they did not go synthetic. They did not leave behind their birthright, and they never lost sight of what it is or how to get along. So there's your example. And people want to argue about these things, and then people always say, well, how can you say nature doesn't lie? There's this certain fish that fakes like it's a rock and then it kills things. I said, you're going to call that a lie? That's a survival strategy.
Yeah,
That's an
exactly.
adaptation.
And by the way, you're a human being. If you stood there and watched it, you would pretty quickly know that fish is going to fake like he's a rock. It's not a lie. It's a survival strategy. And by the way, what made that fish are the truths that guarantee a fish like that can exist. And this goes back to the ancient ideas, which are so critically important that we can't wrap our heads around now. Things like what came first, bullishness or a bull? Which two of those things came first? And at first you think it's just a catch-22 question, but it's so much more. Think about what it means to have bullishness, or this kind of way of being we could describe as a bull, and we have an actual bull that is bullish, but think of what it actually means. Now think of why there's a Taurus sign in the sky clock. There's bullish qualities built into that, because there can't be bullishness unless nature has provided for the possibility of bullishness or rabbitness or humanness or any-ness. If you follow where I'm trying to take you, it's a bit confusing.
I think I'm following. It makes sense on a level that I don't think I could tell you back what you just told me, but something about that sounds right to me. Well, let's go back to when you were documenting the skies and the anomalies that you came across. You did come across a lot of objects that were flying past your camera that they seemed like they were a lot closer to you as opposed to a lot closer to this moon and how supposedly it's so far away.
Well, I think NASA has just started to change that narrative. I think recently they announced there's oxygen on the moon because it's within our atmosphere. I'm not even kidding you.
Interesting.
The old party line is it's over 250,000 miles away. And I'll ask a simple question. How did we get so babied down into unknowing diapers as to possibly conceive that we can look at a thing that's over 250,000 miles away from us? How did we ever fall for that?
Right.
But what I learned was, at first I thought, well, these are satellites. And first I thought they might be aliens. And when I finally got my head on straight, I realized they might be satellites. And as I looked into that, I realized there is no tracking mechanism available that is accurate. And so what you're told is, here's the satellite tracking program, but none of them are accurate. And what you begin to work out in your mind is, if it's off by 2 seconds, an hour from now, it will be untrackable. And if the trajectory is off by a fraction of a degree, tomorrow it'll be untrackable. And so you start to face all these problems. But what pushed me over the edge was I started to say, there's a firmament, no matter goes beyond the firmament. We're all tuned to here, and everything I filmed is so much closer than you think. And then the Huffington Post took a couple of my videos because they call themselves news, so they take them at will. And they said, this character Crow doesn't know his equipment and he's a bit confused, so we have the head of MUFON here and an FBI expert. Do not ask me how an FBI expert knows dick about a telescope, but that's what they do. And at that point I'd had enough. By chance, the telescope I was using had the most brilliant young man who could take the CCD chip in a camera, whether it's shooting stills or video, he could take the setup of your scope and calculate what the value of a pixel is at what Huffington Post was claiming this thing I shot that I'm telling you is in the atmosphere was at 11,000 miles, half of geosynchronous orbit is what they said. So I said, I've had enough. So we calculated out, and if that was true, a single pixel in the image of that object would, well, the whole object, which was 5 pixels wide, would have been something like 4 or 5 times the ISS.
Wow.
And so I laid the math down. I showed that all this stuff is calculable. You can take a CCD chip, you can take a telescope, and a smart individual, smarter than I am, can apply math to value out not just the approximate value. I think it was plus or minus 30 or 40 feet, was not a lot. I don't remember exactly, but it wasn't the aberration possible in the calculation was very little. But what it came down to was, so we're going to believe that this thing's at 11,000 miles and 6-7 times the size of the ISS, which is also fake. And that's how it all, you know, that's what pushed it to the point where this isn't just an idea, we can demonstrate it. And if you apply common sense, there's only one answer here.
So, oh,
So where do chemtrails fall in all of this? What is the necessity for cloud seeding and weather modification?
So specifically, what are you asking me?
I have filmed hundreds of hours when I lived in California, specifically of chemtrails being sprayed all over the sky. What I'm curious about is what the intent or design of that is. Why are they doing that?
Well, part of it could easily be related to the truth of nature. They're blocking a lot of sunlight. The sun is the light of this world, and it does a lot of things in our world. But as an example, well, first, let me say, I've learned something about the people with power in this world. When they do a thing, it's usually doing, Lord knows, half a dozen to 30 different things at once.
Mhm.
So many different things are often traceable to a single thing like chemtrails. But here where I am in Rhode Island, I'm mid-December. 2 days ago, it was 65 at the beach. I wore flip-flops down to the beach. Today, it's freezing.
yeah.
Right.
And the chemtrails have been rampant. So we know that it's weather modification, but we also know there were some pretty terrible things in those chemtrails. But I filmed them for thousands and thousands of hours. They're not all the same. There's
Mhm.
many different kinds,
Mhm.
and the level of the atmosphere they get sprayed into, many, many different things you need to know about how this is done. But we know certainly the 3 heavy metals were put in, and strontium, aluminum, I think what is the other one? Barium, I forget. But the point is if you look at the Alzheimer's and autism epidemic, they're starting to tie these ideas to too much aluminum in the brain. So you can see where this might go. All I can do is speculate, because I spent years before anyone would look up or accept that chemtrails were being sprayed. I filmed them. And even after I showed these little white orbs that used to be common in and around chemtrails, until I started posting the video, then about a year later, it became more difficult to ever see an orb. That's when they finally paid attention. But unfortunately, they just wanted to say UFO and not comprehend that this isn't normal. A normal high-tech modern bypass jet engine is almost incapable of leaving what's called a contrail. But who named it that? There's your con.
Exactly.
A con trail. You're being conned.
Exactly.
And I used to go out in the morning in San Diego. I'd film a blue sky. I'd film the first chemtrail of the day. And I would say, I'm going to come out here and film in 3 hours. The entire sky will be milky white. And
Yeah.
I did it endless times. And still people just didn't really care.
And another aspect of that, Crow, is that if the sky is covered, anything can be happening above those chemtrails. So if we can't see what's above that chemtrail, they could be doing all types of different things. So I've often opined that it's not just the weather modification aspect, but it could also be doing some strange aerospace experiments, or, who knows?
Well, part of what we learned from my years and thousands of hours of telescope work day and night is that our sky is filled with tech. And at
Mhm.
nighttime, unless you had really good night vision tools, you never have a prayer to see it. And by the way, I think it was the 1970s when the rules on what kind of night vision civilians could have changed because of military applications. So in other words, you get better tools in the 70s than you can now.
Right.
What I proved is there is so much tech up there that if you sit around and film a half a degree of sky or a full moon, it will quite often cross that half a degree of sky. Out of the whole sky, I'm looking at my pinky fingernail at arm's length, and I'm regularly filming. That's how much tech is up there all the time.
Crazy. And you have said too that a lot of these objects that are flying by that could be seen as craft, you posit that they are man-made. What makes you think that?
Because it's the only reasonable answer for an adult human being with their head screwed on straight.
Mhm.
If I see a peanut butter sandwich, I can probably logically work out that some person made the peanut butter sandwich. How is
Mhm.
this any different? I
Sure.
can see a flying thing in the air. I know it's man-made. I know it's synthetically made. So who made that? And so this is another thing. I made a couple laws to try to help people think about things a little differently. And the first one I called Crow's Law of High Definition. And basically what it says is that if a thing truly exists in this world and it can be filmed in high definition, then it will be filmed in high definition. The second one had to do with theories, and I don't remember. Oh, here it is. Here's my last attempt to add what I consider a law into the conversation. This is called Crow's Law of Theories. Any theory that remains unproven for years is a speculation of diminishing value and will therefore tend to be applied as propaganda in support of scientism. When you force your mind back around to reality and common sense, the whole world opens up like an oyster, and all these things you thought were unknowable are in fact knowable. But what it does more than anything is it rips the scab off the web of lies that's been built since Lord knows how long ago.
Do you think we've ever seen a natural sky
In our lifetime,
in the past 100 years?
yes, it's been messed with, but I can remember back in the 70s, I spent all my time outside. You can still go find video. It's just a different blue. I remember going to New Mexico and seeing a sky so blue it almost hurt my eyes. But sure, it was not pure, I guess would be the thing, because we know they've cloud seeded and done all kinds of things. They were always messing with it, but it was much different than it ended up being by, I don't know, mid 90s to late 90s. Then the jig was up.
Right. Well, there's documentation from the military that they started cloud seeding and weather modification in World War II. That
Right.
this was a form of a technique of war, was to create
Right.
these terrible weather events. So that's the only reason why I asked that, because it seems like we haven't had natural weather events, these terrible typhoons and hurricanes, and all of these things seem to be man-made.
Yeah, they are. Of course. Even in California, I grew up as a kid. Every 8 to 10 years, you can expect a bad fire. We get 5 of them a year now.
Isn't that insane?
The
It's
drought
insane.
that's there is all, and so I think maybe what we should say, to speculate on what you said, is have we ever known an organic sky to
Right.
communicate the idea free of, no, we haven't. But I would push back the date you gave to the early 1900s. I think it might have been the 1920s or something when silver nitrate was first blasted into clouds. So yes, it's just the difference between now and then is they can put fleets and fleets and fleets of airplane that fly day and night. And back then they couldn't pull it off, and the range of an aircraft and all the things they had to overcome. But we've entered a world where money doesn't matter anymore. As a matter of fact, money's about to go away.
Do you think that those airplanes are man operated, or are they mechanically operated?
Either or either. Clearly, we have the capability to do either. And by the way, it's not hard for the military to tell a lie to get someone to do that. Oh, the world's going to burn up and you're saving the world by doing this. That would work for a lot of people. But also, if you could remote it, which they can, you could do just about anything you want, because a remote control plane doesn't give a damn what it's doing.
Exactly.
So in this, back to the firmament narrative, would the firmament then contain the moon? Would the moon be inside of that or outside of that, along with the luminaries?
So this is a speculation.
Sure.
From my point of view, it can't be proved out, but probably the moon and the sun are either within it or on this side of it. And the luminaries are something, there's a old, what's the guy's name? Flamel. The Flamel woodcut where the little alchemist is poking his head out of the dome to see what lays beyond. That's probably one of the truest representations, just in a kind of cartoon fashion that's being delivered. And these are things we have to work out. I did a show not too long ago where I commiserated. I'm a freaking grown man and I don't even know the gender of the sun for sure. And the sad part of that is it's a 50-50 guess. Maybe there's a third option, but isn't this something we should all know from the time we're about 10? And so all this stuff needs to be rediscovered. And this is part of the problem with so many of the groups, which incidentally, I support everyone in Flat Earth. You're doing what you should. Question these things. Try to poke a hole in it. Try to work out what's feasible and what's not. But the problem is the groups get these little milestones where we all believe this now. And that becomes problematic because people who don't want to help will join those groups and they'll make some crap up just to cause trouble, as we've seen so often.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on simulation theory?
Specifically?
I mean,
are we living in it? Is that what you're getting at?
Sure. For
no,
one. No,
we're not living in it. No.
Okay, because I was thinking too, some people do posit, of course, that we are living in a simulation, which it never struck my gut in a truthful way. Like, oh my God, that's it. It never made me.
If we were living in a simulation, what would be the point of everything we see going around? If you're being simulated, you can be simulated to do anything.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of holes in that plot, but I was thinking too, then maybe in that narrative, the firmament could be the boundary of that simulation, but yeah, that's probably neither here nor there.
Well, there's more to this. The movie The Matrix, which I hate to reference all the time, but it did take time to poke us all in the face in 1999 with all its little clever things it wanted to put into the consciousness, which was beginning to rise at that point. I did an episode, 2019. And in it, I said the cathedrals are being taken apart and they are paths to higher humanity in glass and stone. And in that episode, I directed everybody, if you have pictures, books on the cathedrals, treasure them, save them, protect them. You know what happened a month later? They burnt down Notre Dame. And that was the topic. That was the cathedral that I used to do the examination.
Wow.
I don't watch a lot of TV, but I take care of my mother who's got Alzheimer's. And so I do see TV, and I saw a Nova coming on, one of the worst affected shows of anything, because it purports to be public TV. People don't even know what that means. There is no media that's free of what we're talking about, but they're going to talk about putting the roof back on. So I recorded it and watched it. And one of the things they love to tell you is just by chance, they did a detailed 3D scan of the inside of that church 2016, because they knew it was going to get burned in 2019. And what they call that scan, wait for it, is Notre Dame's digital twin.
Wow. Holy shit.
Now put your mind around Ready Player One. Now put your mind around Google Earth. Do you remember when Google was brand new and suddenly you could see everything in the world? You were like, wow, this is amazing. What happened? They put out this modeling technology so everyone could model their house. So basically the entirety of the world that is on Google Earth has been modeled out. Are you following what I'm laying down?
Exactly.
So as the world goes to hell in a handbasket and people are so drugged out by the things they're being forced or, the things they put in their body, does the world get so ugly that you volunteer to put on the visor just so you can be happy and go exist in the metaverse and truly become a copper top?
Yep.
Yeah.
And now Facebook has turned into Meta. So just blatantly putting it right out there, like it's insane. And the stuff
Yeah,
that Alison McDowell is going on about, it's just really outrageously nuts. And that's taking that synthesis of the universe and of nature to the nth degree and completely replacing it.
there's so much that is in old books. And by the way, if this train stays on the tracks, books are going to be on the hit list, because the internet allows you to change anything anytime you want. And if you can't know that by now, and you don't understand what Wikipedia actually is, and if you don't comprehend the nonsense that was the Julian Assange, you finally got a place you can tell on people when you're reporting to the very people that need to be reported on. My point here is, well, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to say it. This is what I'm going to say. So this morning, Rose pings me and says, I was just removed as admin on the Facebook site, and all I've been doing is putting up the episode images and a link to the new episode on Crrow777 Radio. At that point, I said, here we are. You have no idea how much effort I've put in to running under radar. People complain about my titles all the time, but there's a reason for that. The images I can convey a thing in an image in a puzzle fashion, or something that you've got to figure out that a bot can't quite handle.
Yeah.
But now we're going to have a meeting and we're going to reassess use of any social media of any kind.
Yeah.
But
I've thought about that too, like completely dissociating from any social media. Then I worry about, well, how will anybody hear about it? It's like they'll come to it, they'll come to you if they really want the information.
Yeah, I got off of Facebook. I got off of Instagram. I realized when you read the terms and conditions that you're basically giving them ownership over your work. I said, well, I'm not doing that. I don't want to give them ownership over my photography. I don't want to give them ownership over my thoughts.
That changed, when I first was putting all that telescope video, which represented almost every hour of my waking life. We read those things back in the day, and it was a bit, it set you back on your heels to think about a few things, but it later became, use our service, we can take your stuff. And so basically the lunar wave that I shot, that was posted on YouTube. And so people to this day come have bad words for me or a poison pen email because I'm not putting videos on YouTube. What I do on YouTube is I put up a 1-minute bumper that says I've got a new episode, and they can't quite in their little feeble minds put together why all of that stopped.
Right.
Do you understand that everything I ever shot and posted, someone can make a claim on every bit of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't do any writing on a computer. I write by hand or I write on a typewriter because I don't want to be hacked. And, I think it's funny because people say, well, you're not George R.R. Martin. Like, why do you care? And I think it's just important to protect your work. I think that that's one of the things that we still have is our minds, that we have some level of control over, and what is coming out of our minds. So I think
you're more important than George R.R. Martin, because George R.R. Martin is not being censored. So automatically out of the gate, the value of what you're doing trumps that nonsense, even though there's some disturbing truths wrapped up in the tales he wrote.
Well, I've lost literally hundreds of friends, Crow, from posting videos about chemtrails. People have called me insane. I lost an entire community of friends that I had known since I was a teenager. And it's one of those things where you just realize that it's too much for some people to be able to see something like that they feel out of control.
Welcome to the cowardly existence that is us now, where people would rather be damaged and pushed around than possibly stand up and question what's going on. And while I feel for you, because I know what you're talking about, what matters here? Does right matter in our world anymore? Does truth matter in our world anymore? And I've staked it all. I've staked it all because I came around to truth doesn't give a damn, doesn't need defense, doesn't need anything. It will be there, but will we be able to recognize or know about it? And so I staked everything, and I found where it existed. I can still remember the moment I realized that the truth of everything was in nature. and that no man could change what was written in the stars. It let me know that this Fugazi world we're living in has to be maintained till the end of time. The JFK lie, there's a lie it's got to be maintained to the end of time. The
Right.
moon landing lie, there's a lie that's got to be maintained to the end of time. In other words, it's not sustainable. And so now we see what the avenue of approach is: total control. So we don't give a damn what you know is true or not true. You're not going to eat if you don't do what we say. And by the way, you're a drone because you shot some crap into your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I think that on some level it is an experiment, because it's kind of like how much can this ant farm take before it destroys itself? I just feel like there is some grand design here, and there is some, some nefarious puppet master that is orchestrating all of this. Because it would be very easy to exterminate the entire population of this earth. That could be done with a push of a button. So
Let's address that. Are you inferring that a nuclear weapon could wipe us out?
Here we go.
it could be plutonium in the water source, it could be uranium in the water source. It could be.
Well, you see, so nuclear weapons don't exist as they're described. And I did plenty of research to demonstrate it. Since then, I've found very nuclear scientists that wrote books and in between the lines let you know that it's all nonsense. And the reason is because this creation wouldn't be much of a creation if some man was clever enough to put an end to it, would it? And so then we have to ask, is this a creation? Everyone has to come to their own idea. And does truth matter? Or if anything happens here, does it matter? I came to the conclusion that it does matter. And the first time I came to that conclusion was reading very old Hindu texts. They're some of the best arbiters of huge periods of time. And what they said is this place started with this many root races, and each aeon will go by and they describe. And they basically say that in this creation, that will not be deviated from. And what we find in the control of our world is they're powerful enough. Why don't they just come in with steel-toed boots and have done with it? Because they can't violate universal law. So they have to have your tacit agreement because the creator gave you the divine spark and free will. So when you know all these things, you begin to understand, yes, there is a creation, and yes, it matters what you do, which the Amish are busy demonstrating to us every single day. So now that you know a few things that can answer these questions, what you begin to realize is a lion evil when he whacks the zebra at the watering hole? Does that make the lion evil or not?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
Why is that? Because he's doing what lions do, right?
Yes.
There is no other option for that lion if he wants to survive, which is the basic drive of all of us. Then you begin to apply what you know about that section of nature to what's happening to us.
Right.
I would go so far as it won't get everybody, but I'm beginning to wonder if what we are seeing happens with every 2,160 or whatever it is years, each sign of the zodiac, the large 2,000 plus year transition, if this kind of thing goes on every time. In the older Hindu text, they named root races. These things are so hidden anymore. And they said there would be sub races, and this would go on and on and on to work out some overarching thing in the end. But what's going on now almost feels like bean counting, doesn't it? Like whatever decisions you make now are going to put you on a road that you're going to walk later, kind of idea.
Sure. And I think that I know what you're saying, Hunter, about this being an experiment or feeling like an experiment, but I don't think the experiment is existence itself. I think the experiment that maybe you're referring to is something that's being inflicted on existence or on some of existence by some of the players in all of this. But I don't think that is the sole purpose of existence itself.
Well, think about this, Hunter. Do you feel like the people, these supposed ancient, the oldest families we know about that have all the power and money and have for a long time, do you think they're in control of their lives, or do you think it's possible that they're slaved out and they have to do what they're doing?
You know, that's
In
an
other words, why would a human being piss in the water if human beings need water to drink? You see,
exactly. Or spray the air with
right?
poison with that's what they have to breathe.
Almost seems like we've been invaded.
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
point I would make is when you get down to throwing out all the emotional connection and all the people you know that have been just screwed over, and you logically begin to take this apart and you use nature, because there is no lie in nature, to help you get to where you want to be, then you go to the lion at the watering hole and you reason out what that's about. Then you go to the oak tree and you reason that out. And there's another part of this which has been thrown into so many spiritual traditions, the idea of reincarnation. So if we're going to be reincarnated, that would mean one thing, but if we're not, that would mean another. So what I did is I had read all my life and for many, many years accepted that's a given. You're going to get reincarnated here. I mean, and I looked for the example in nature and I couldn't find it. And here's the irony. I used an oak tree as my example. Can an oak tree prove to me reincarnation is true? And what I found is no. What an oak tree does is what we all do. It puts seeds out, it creates another version similar to what it was, but it lives its life, it goes away, it rots back into the ground and becomes part of the overall system from the material realm. And a month after I had done that mind experiment, I found an old Indian yogi commiserating that the Brahmin priests had been told a falsehood and they've dropped their ball and they've been doing endless damage for hundreds of years by teaching people there's reincarnation. So here's the problem. Is my mind experiment enough to get me there? Close, but maybe not 100%. Do I trust this yogi that wrote a book who said all these reasonable things? Or do I go back to what's been so commonly purported, that there are in fact going to be reincarnations nonstop? And these are some of the overarching things that plague us, because an adult human being tuned to nature would be able to arrive at an acceptable way to proceed. And what I've tried to do here is show how difficult it is for us right now to arrive at an acceptable place to proceed, with beyond saying I'm going to flip the coin. I'm going to go right because I decided I'm going to go right kind of idea, more than just chance involved in knowing.
So what do we do? How do we proceed?
Grow up like you mean it and get those diapers off like you mean it. And more than anything, treat every living thing with respect in this world. We are all connected here. And what can happen to anybody can happen to you, which we didn't used to believe in the mighty United States. But now we've been forced to take a second look at what's possible. We are not the white knight. And those things we saw happen in Iraq or anywhere else, they can happen here. And everybody knows it. You know, the Buddha had a parable that he told that illustrates what we're talking about very well. The Buddha was watching a farmer plow the field, and the farmer was cutting into the earth. He made a furrow and a worm was uncovered, and a bird flew out of the sky and picked up and ate the worm. And instantly the Buddha had the knowing that we are all connected in this place. And these are true things. And part of what's happened to us is we've been divided. Well, you're a Christian, you don't talk to those people. You're a flat earther, you don't talk to those people. You're a vegetarian, you don't talk to those people. And that is the highest level of control I can imagine. We are all connected here. And if I get cut, I bleed. If you get cut, you bleed. And until we realize that we exist as the apex within a web of life in this place we call the world, we're going to be batted around like chess pieces on a board.
Amen. Yeah. That sounds like an absolutely excellent place to end. Plus, it sounds like you have a dog that wants to go out. If you're all right with that, we can just draw it to a close for now. And maybe you can tell people where they can find you and your work.
Everything I'm about now is on a privately served website. It's Crrow777radio.com, Crrow777radio.com. This is our last bastion of freedom of speech, which is the membership area that allows us to ensure we can speak freely, at least for now. And thank you guys so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd like to wish everybody out there a happy, healthy, and higher-minded new era.
Likewise
Thank
to
you
you
so
too.
much. It
Thank
was really inspiring and wonderful to have you on the show.
Yes, thanks for the work you do, Crow, and we will definitely be chatting again.
Yes.
Cheers. If I've got time, I'm happy to come. Bye-bye.
See you, Crow. I fucking love Crrow777. I really do. There's something very no nonsense about him that I really respect. And after watching that documentary, Shooting the Moon, it really kind of put it in perspective. First of all, I'd never had a face to put with the voice and the things, all the crazy and wonderful things that the voice talks about. But there's just something about his demeanor that's very no nonsense, upfront, and kind of sort of tells it like it is. Uh, and the fact that he's just not about to be hoodwinked by anything. I it's just I don't know. There's just something about that his outlook, his attitude that really impresses me.
Well, what I found so fascinating is that the Huffington Post even took notice of him.
Mhm.
You know, it's one of these methinks he doth protest too much. You know, if he wasn't onto something, then a national media outlet wouldn't pay him any attention. So that's pretty telling right there that they have gone out of their way to grab some of his footage and try to debunk him. I have been obsessed with the moon from childhood. Growing up on the road, I had a very deep relationship with the stars and, you know, astral bodies. And I spent a lot of time in the backseat of cars traveling, you know, throughout the night. And so to have someone who has taken so much time and pains and spent thousands of dollars on equipment to film the moon and the events that he's been able to capture are absolutely mind blowing. I would highly, highly recommend viewing this documentary. And again, this is not someone who's telling you what he's capturing on these films or on these videos. He's putting it out there and basically creating a dialogue like let's talk about this. What is this stuff? And I think that that's a really great place to arrive and approach this stuff because he doesn't know what the fuck he's looking at. We don't know what the fuck he's looking at, but we need to be able to talk about it, you know. So I just really enjoyed his take and the fact that he spent so much time in observation and documenting what he's observed.
Yeah, you know, at one point I had gone back and forth about having somebody on the Melt um, that was a flat earther. And I'm not saying that Crrow777 is a flat earther necessarily. He wouldn't say that he wasn't. Um, but it was something that he said during the documentary that made me think, like, why not? You know, like, and it's not that I necessarily wrote that whole narrative off as something obviously fictional because I don't fucking know, you know, I don't know and I don't not know. So it was him that said, you know, it's important to listen to everybody. It's important to listen to all viewpoints, everybody's take. Everybody's got a little slice of the puzzle. And slice, am I mixing my metaphors there? A piece, they've got a little piece of the pie. And anyway, it was some little light went off in my head when he said that, and it made me go, you know what, let's have a flat earther on, which we're going to have a few episodes down the line. But you know, it just sort of reinstated something that was one of the original impetuses for me wanting to do this podcast, is to hear stories and to hear especially stories and experiences and research that people have done on things that our society doesn't give a whole lot of credence to. because I think that's where the real stuff lies, because there's a reason society doesn't give credence to it. It's because they want you looking in a completely different direction. They want you in a box that they can control. And once you leave that metaphorical box, then you're not manipulatable anymore. And that is the exact result that they don't want.
Well, I think that using these terms, maligning people by calling them flat earthers or anti-vaxxers or conspiracy theorists, these are ways to degrade and discredit people. And so what that does to someone potentially is that it just devalues anything that someone's going to say if we've labeled them something. So where I land with all of this is, I don't know. I have no idea if the earth is flat or not. I have no idea if we landed on the moon. I have no idea if there's a Nazi base on the moon. I don't know. I wasn't there and I didn't observe these things firsthand. So again, I try to deal with what I have some relationship with or I have some knowledge of. And I think that's what makes this podcast so interesting to me is that we're talking to people that we may or may not agree with, that we may or may not have the same information or differing viewpoints on the same topic, and yet we're open to it. We're open to having these discussions. And I think we just need more of this in life, just being able to have these discourses and be respectful. He could be right for all we know. His perspective could be one that is intentionally being suppressed because he's onto something. So, he deserves a platform and he deserves the ability to share his information. And that's what we're here to do.
And speaking of podcasts, I highly suggest his podcast. It's amazing. I am a subscriber to it, and he just talks about some really mind-blowing, just incredible stuff, very much based in research and fact, and it's just astounding stuff. I really am constantly just bamboozled. That's not a word. That's not the word I want to use. That means fooled. What am I trying to? We've done so many of these intros or outros. I am just constantly amazed. We'll just use that word.
Befuddled.
Befuddled, yeah, by the curveballs that he's constantly throwing, and yeah, totally keeping me intellectually, spiritually, metaphysically on my toes. And I think that's an important thing for sure. So we'll have the link to his podcast and his website in the episode notes to be sure. And he will absolutely be on the Melt again. Definitely. There's no doubt about that.
I'd love it. I'd love to delve further into his work and just see what he has to offer.
Absolutely. It's going to happen. All right. Well, thank you so much, dear listeners, for making it this far and listening in general. Hopefully you've gleaned something from this conversation and the conversations that we tend to have here in general. We very much appreciate you and your attention. And if you would like to get a hold of either of us, if you have comments about the show or perhaps suggestions for a guest, we've gotten a lot of great guest suggestions that I've ended up having on the show. Yeah, feel free to send those to either the Melt podcast at protonmail.com or
Hunter-Muse, M-U-S-E, at protonmail.com.
And there's sort of an ongoing conversation that we have on our Discord channel, and you can get to that by going to the website, themeltpodcast.com, and on the top menu you will see Discord chats. Go there and that will take you to our Discord channels. Yeah, I think that about covers it. Again, one of the major ways that this podcast sees the light of day and expands is by word of mouth. So please tell your friends or your family, like-minded or not, about the melt, either the whole podcast in general or a particular episode. And yeah, word of mouth is how this spreads. So
Absolutely. And even if you don't necessarily agree with us, share. Let's have a dialogue. Chris and I are very open to that.
yes.
And we would love to speak to people who don't necessarily agree with us, because we don't want to be in an echo chamber. We really love discourse, and we encourage you to open a dialogue with us, because we are available for that.
Absolutely. All right. Until next time, we've got a lot of fantastic shows coming down the line. So stay tuned, and yeah, the best to all of you.
Thank you.
If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to the melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make the melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word.
This program contains subject matter and language that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Yes, man, please get the free vaccine. Here's my vaccine card. Has anybody gotten sick from the donuts? I've been having terrible diarrhea. I don't know if it's the vaccine or the donuts.
He's an addict.
He's a really good kid. He's had a rough patch.
Yeah. Attention Walmart shoppers. My name's Alex Stein, and I just want to say I quit. I got the vaccine.
There's a vaccine. Vaccine got him addicted.
It's so delicious, it's definitely worth the diarrhea.
That vaccine is just, it's changed him.
All free with my vaccine.
He ruined my 16th birthday party.
We got a name for these drugs on the street. We got Johnson & Johnson's, and Jesus Juice, we got Moderna, MK Ultra. Whatever you want, we got it.
Yeah.
The vax is out, and so supply and demand. He's my number one customer, that's definitely for sure. And my brother is so good with his mouth.
Alexandria Stein, Primo Stone, Christopher Pringle.
You guys, Billy Ray, please don't call me a male
Thank
ever again.
you.
I'm a lady. Thank you. No ketamine, one cotton candy coming up.
You guys are literally racist murderers by not mandating the vaccine.
And that's where my issue was. I let it happen. But no, this wasn't my idea. This wasn't Alex's idea.
And you guys need to get shots, and everybody's on. I don't care if it's experimental. It doesn't matter.
It takes time. Rome wasn't built in one day, and neither will your gender reassignment.
Transitioning to be the most beautiful woman alive. Every other woman will be jealous of my beauty.
It doesn't need FDA approval. Vaccines in kids now.
No, I didn't stop it. That's my problem. I
didn't stop it.
Right, will it come up positive for COVID if I do crystal meth? Okay, but why did I have you in such a little place like this? You're a nice lady like you. This is kind of scary in here.
I hope that he'll take this opportunity to get an intervention.
But 99's doing just fine. I'm on the grind all the time. Almost just what hit you, Jared. What the heck, dude?
It's not the best.